Hi everyone, welcome to BuildIt's Blender animation tutorial. This is the fourth video in our Intro to Blender series. In this video, we'll be applying some of the 12 principles of animation to make a bouncing ball and to work with our rig. Then we'll learn how to render out your animation in a video format so you can share it with your friends. The 12 principles of animation were developed by early Disney animators as some basic guidelines to making more realistic or appealing animations. Though these principles were developed for hand-drawn animation, most of them still apply and are good to keep in mind when animating. Let's just briefly go over them. There's many resources out there that go in more detail all over the internet. Squash and stretch gives your object more of a sense of material and flexibility. Anticipation means that there needs to be an action before your main action to give it more context. Staging is making sure what you want to be noticed is in the focal point of your scene. Straight ahead action versus pose-to-pose action is two different approaches to hand-drawn animation. In computer animation, it is usually all pose-to-pose, which means you set your key poses first and then edit the in-betweens. Follow-through and overlapping action just means that you need to complete the action. So if you're hitting a ball with a bat, the bat needs to be completing its swing. Overlapping action is when different actions end at different times. Slow in and slow out gives actions more of a sense of momentum, and I'll show you how this is easily achieved in Blender. Arc is the idea that most things have a curved movement rather than straight right angles. Secondary action is more animations you can create to give your scenes more life, like an eye blinking, for example. Timing is the speed that an action occurs, and this is also giving it more of a sense of material and weight. Exaggeration is one of the special things about animation that you can make it appear larger than life and give more of an impact in each action. Solid drawing doesn't really apply in 3D computer animation since everything is already 3D, but you can keep in mind that you want to angle your object or light it in a way that gives your object more of a sense of volume. Appeal is kind of an abstract notion of making your object likable or more attractive to the viewer. In the bouncing ball, let's focus on squash and stretch, slow in and slow out, arc, timing, and exaggeration. Here I need to introduce two new windows for you to play with, the dope sheet and the graph editor. I'm just going to pull them out on the side here. Just make another one here too. I'll make this one the dope sheet and this one the graph editor. So you can see here that they're blank, but what the dope sheet will do is allow you to see all the keyed poses in a scene and move them around, delete keys, etc. The graph editor allows you to edit the action itself. Now let's play with our first key pose. So I have a ball created here. Please take the time to pause and create a ball if you need to. Let's say I want my ball up high. I'm going to move it along the Z-axis up and hit I for insert keyframe. And there's many reasons why you would want to maybe key only the location information, rotation, or scaling independently, but I'm just going to key everything just to make it easier. So location, rot, scale, and you can see that the keys appeared here. So let's move it over maybe 10 frames. Right now, if I go into the properties bar, I can see that my frame rate is 24 frames per second. So this is a little less than half a second. I'm going to make it go back down and key it here. So now you can see that I have two keys. In my graph editor, you can see where my first key was and where my second key is. There. Okay, so you can see here that this is already kind of doing the slow in and slow out by curving less here. The steeper the slope, the more the movement. And you can pull at these using your right mouse button, you can pull at these to exaggerate that slow and slow out even more. Make sure you're affecting the right thing. So here I'm only doing my Z location. And so I can probably just lock everything else so that I'm not accidentally moving things that I don't want to move. So here, let's move this out again. This is what it looks like so far. Okay, now we can probably just duplicate these keys every 10 frames. I'm moving it and just kind of eyeballing it. It'll usually snap to the 10 frames here. And you can see that it shows the movement here. So here, I'm just going to exaggerate that slow in and out more. There you go. You can also choose to make these lines more linear. So you can select your keys, hit T, and then choose linear, and you can see that these are more straight actions. And you can see that this does not look very lifelike. So I'm going to put it back to the way it was by Control Z. There. So now we have the slow in, slow out, we have the arc, we have the timing, which is a little fast, but we can edit that later. We don't have squash and stretch, and we don't have exaggeration. So on the bottom, I'm going to want to squash it. So I'm going to scale the Z down, scale the X and Y larger. When you squash and stretch something, you do want to make sure that it's keeping the same basic volume so that it looks like it's still the same object. Oops. Oh, you want to make sure that you've unlocked everything so that it scales. And you can see here that it's scaling before it hits the ground, which I don't want. So I am just going to move this scaling key over so that it happens when it hits the ground. And then I'm going to key this original one and then duplicate that. And just lock everything else out to when it bounces back up. So let's see how that looks. It's a little abrupt, so I'll move this one out again. And then same as before, you just want to duplicate everything over. Here. So now I'm just going to start making this into a loop so that I can see how it looks just running continuously. So the way I'm going to do that is I know my scene starts with it on the highest part of the Z. So I'm just going to find another key when it is there. So I'm going to hit E for end. You can also adjust that here. Here you can see my action is like this. Let me just delete all these keys afterwards so that if I wanted to, don't forget to unlock everything. So if I wanted to edit that later, I can. And I would say this isn't even exaggerated enough. So for this one, I'm going to even more exaggerate. There. You just kind of have to fiddle with it until it looks good. Then in the middle here, I'm going to, before it gets to its peak, I'm going to make more like of a dropping action. So I'm going to pull the Z and X down. And then I'm going to also just duplicate this key over so that it's also stretching as it's shooting up. Don't forget to copy this over so that everything's the same as the beginning of the loop so that the loop looks correct. Okay, let's move on to our armature. So I'm just going to hide these two spheres and then find my armature and the cube. This is my rig from the last rigging tutorial. Here you can see my person. Here's the base bone. So let's say I just wanted him to wave his arms. So it's a good practice just to keep your base bone keyed to an area. I'm gonna just move his arm down. Okay, so this is my first one, it's down. And then I want to raise it up. And then give it a little wave. Let's see. So that is pretty boring right now, right? Let's give it a sense of anticipation. So he's really excited to see this person. I'm going to move this down maybe 0.5, see? And then I'm going to rotate his legs like he's jumping, like he's bending his legs. And then make sure you're keying everything. And then in this one here, I'm going to put him back up. But now let's make his neck part of that jump as well. So I'm going to rotate it Y so it's a little bit down. And then rotate that up. And then this other arm should kind of swing. Maybe swing out. I think it should happen before everything else happens. So I'm going to move this here. I want to exaggerate that more. So look. Here, let's have some secondary action so that it looks more natural. Some of that looked a little weird. Head looks pretty stagnant here. This kind of snaps back a little too quickly. If you wanted to exaggerate a little bit more, we can also do kind of like a bend at the waist. And then remember to follow through. So there might be a little bouncing back action. There. Now it's looking a little bit more lifelike. Okay, now how do we export this? So first, you'll need a camera. So go back to object mode and make a camera and point it at your person. You can go to Object, you can go to View, Cameras, Active Camera to see what you're looking at. So if you select, oh, just kidding, there's already a camera here. So here's my camera. Go to Active Camera. You can, while selecting the camera, you can still grab and rotate yourself. Let's see how this looks. Probably have to move back a little bit. This is just a very basic thing if we're thinking about solid drawing, I probably want to view him a little bit from the side, so he's not just a one-dimensional character. Sometimes this can be hard to do while you're still in the camera, so you can always just hop out of the camera, move it, take a look. There you go. Okay, so now that you have a camera, you'll need a light source. So I have a lamp in this scene as well, but let's move it to the front so that the light is coming from the front of him. So here we're using the Blender render engine. It's a very quick rendering engine, so if you're just doing like a rough draft just to see if everything's looking good, you can do it in Blender render. But in my texturing tutorial, I had also talked about cycles render, which is a more advanced kind of rendering. So if we go and hit Shift Z, in Shift Z, you can see how he's being rendered here. So the light source isn't quite enough. You can also go here from rendered to material or solid. So I'm going to increase the strength and size of this lamp. Let's try that again. It's getting better. We can also put a material on him. Let's just make him default white and see what happens. Change the color of the world. You can also do an emissions plane. I find this easier. It feels like when you're like filming something and you have like a light reflector or something like that. So it has more like a all-around natural light. Just make sure this is in front of him. Trying to play the animation in this mode can really kill your computer. So I am not going to. Just make the scene a little happier by adding some color to the scene. Let's make him a different color so that he can stand out. There. Okay, so now let's make sure that, let's get this a little farther away so we're not seeing it. Okay. Now if you go here, you have render and animation. So we're going to do animation, but first let's make sure that all my settings are correct. You can try to use your graphics your graphics card to render, which is usually faster. Let's make the resolution 100%. Actually, I'm going to leave it at 50% just so mine renders quickly. Here's my end frame. Here, you're going to want to save this somewhere. So I'm going to put it in my Blender tutorials, animation, accept. And then here is output. So right now it's going to do a series of PNGs, which I don't want, but you can use and then import into, for example, Adobe Premiere is as an image sequence. I'm just going to do FFmpeg video. The encoding style, I'm going to make QuickTime, which will give me a .mov file. You can mess with these as well, but those are just the basic ones that you will need. And then if we hit render animation, it'll go frame by frame. Oops, you're going to want to also make sure if you see this, so you can stop this here, that I have all of these things and you can see that there's like a render, like the camera right here, which means it's rendering. So I only want to render the things I need. So not those. Let's do animation again. There's a cube. Oh, I see. So I'm gonna get rid of these cubes here. Hit render again, and he should be fine. You want to make sure that you either delete or hide from rendering from all of the things in your scene that you don't want rendered. Otherwise, you're going to end up rendering maybe like 500 frames and then realize that you don't want them. So this might take a little while to render, but then afterwards you'll be done.